I'm going to show you why 545 is way better than you think in Escape from Tarkov. This caliber is rarely used, especially at the higher levels, but with all the changes that have been happening to Tarkov recently, if you're not using 545, you are definitely missing out. Back in the day, the AK was king in Escape from Tarkov, but for a long time now, most of the AKs, and especially the 545 caliber in general, has been pretty much unanimously considered garbage by most of the community. This was due to two main reasons. One, the damage, the actual flesh damage of most of the rounds wasn't quite as good as others, which kind of still reigns true today. And the other reason is because you could just buy so many more things, so many more ammos and guns and attachments and everything were purchasable and easily accessible, so why ever use a 545 gun? But there have been a lot of changes to Tarkov recently, and the pros are starting to outweigh the cons of 545. We can talk about the price of the guns being normally much cheaper, that there's actual gun diversity. There's a bunch of different 545 guns that are usable. There are great budget builds and great meta options. The recoil buffs that have happened recently have definitely affected 545 in a positive way. There are more ammos, actually more different ammos to choose from in 545, and the availability of those ammos is almost unmatched. So we can start by talking about the ammo because that is the biggest criticism of 545. Like we said, the damage is low, and that's definitely true. And I personally would love to see a buff of the flesh damage to most of the rounds by, 3 to 8. You wouldn't need too much before it would actually kind of feel OP, honestly, because when we factor in some of the other things, we can see that that gap really is starting to shrink. More meta ammo is now harder to get than ever before. Some ammo is being removed completely from the flea and the traders. Some ammo is getting moved to higher level traders. Crafts for the highest tier ammo are taking longer and require more things, therefore being more expensive. And the raiders and the bosses spawn with the best rounds less and less often. This has resulted in more of the second and third best rounds selling out instantly. But are these rounds even good? Are they worth it? I feel like oftentimes we just get caught up in buying whatever other people are buying or buying whatever sells out. But if we take a look at what these ammo changes have done and how the best 545 ammos stack up, we can see that that gap has shrunk significantly. Most of the ammos for the guns that people want to run right now, excluding some of the really big calibers like 7.62x54R or 308, which are calibers that generally don't have accessible full auto options, most of the ammos are much closer to 545 than they have been in the past. We can take a look at SB193 from the P90, FMJ or Subsonic for the MP7, M62 for the MCX 300 Blackout, 56A1 for M4s or all 556 guns, and even 7.62 PS for the RDs, mutants, and AKs or whatever. Most of these ammos are the second or third best option for their caliber and are often sold out or very expensive or both. 545, on the other hand, has options. PP, BP, and BT are all pretty close together when it comes to performance, whereas most calibers only have maybe like one really good round, one okay round, and then the rest are kind of garbage. 545, you've got options. All three of those ammos are purchasable, and they sit alongside a barter for BS, which is arguably the best 545 round that you can get. All of those from the traders, whereas most of the other calibers have maybe one viable round that's purchasable or that you can get from the traders, and then the rest you have to craft or go find. And something nobody really ever talks about is how 545 has its top 6 rounds in this caliber, all findable in raid and all in good quantity. You can find boxes of 30 or boxes of 120 rounds of PP, BP, BT, and BS. 120 round boxes of the best ammo for 545 laying all over reserve, woods, customs, all these maps. And on the flip side of that, most of the other calibers, you can really only find the good rounds in really small quantities every once in a while in a green weapon box. So 545 has options, and those options are available, but are they any good? You can take a look at something like BP, which is as good as the MP7 ammo. It's got more pen than Subsonic, and it's got more damage than FMJ, coming in a few less pen. And the BT round is pretty much identical to FMJ, and BT has more pen than every other ammo that I listed here, tying only with FMJ. Now, you might say that, well, fire rate is what makes guns like the MP7 better, and you're definitely right about that, but that curse is also a blessing. Lower fire rate rifles means that there is lower perceived recoil. Couple that with the recoil buffs and changes that have been happening recently, and you can really hit your shots with 545 AKs. This is why people choose Subsonic over FMJ. More shots on target with a slightly worse round is almost always better, especially when the difference in damage is so small. You're not going to need 4 additional shots, you might need 1. And that's kind of my point. It's clear to see across the board here that the 545 ammos have less damage for sure, but how often is that actually going to change a fight, and how much would it change a fight? All the 545 ammos that I listed can 1-tap a PMC to the head, and they can 2-tap to the thorax. And if you notice, all the other ammos I listed can one tap to the head and need 2 shots to the thorax as well. Now, I'm not saying that the lower damage will never play a factor. Depending on the armor the person was wearing or your distance from the target, it might manifest in needing 1 or 2 more shots to kill, but the other side of this is true as well. If someone's wearing a class 4 armor, 545 BT has a better chance to pen that on the first shot than 193, Subsonic, PS for 762, or 56A1. Some of these ammos definitely may be technically better, but is it worth it to camp Peacekeeper for ammos every 3 hours when the difference in time to kill would be measured in milliseconds? Ultimately, I think people are undervaluing how the recent ammo changes have brought the meta closer to where 545 has been, and they make too big of a deal over the damage difference, even though, once again, I would personally like to see the damage buffed a little bit. This is only half of the equation as well. If the guns and attachments were exactly the same, I would say use the better, more well-rounded bullet. But similar to how most people use Subsonic over FMJ, sacrificing some killing potential for usability, you can build extremely usable 545 guns for sometimes less than half of the price of other meta guns. There are actually tons of options here as well. You've got the AK-74N, which is kind of like the classic AK. You've got the AK-105, which is a shorter AK, which actually has the lowest recoil dispersion stat of any of the 545 AKs. You've got the AK-74UB, which is weirdly the best feeling 545 AK in the game right now, and then you also have the RPK. These base guns are extremely affordable. You can get all of these reliably off the flea market for between 30 and 40,000 rubles most of the time, compared to some other guns like the HKs, M4, RDs, or Mutants that is really, really cheap. They also have the most customization and budget options that actually feel useful compared to other guns like the HK and the Mutant, where they almost feel unusable unless they're fully meta. You can get very usable budget versions of all of these guns for at or under 100,000 rubles. And if you can deal with ditching the suppressor, you can get best in slot versions of all these guns for only about 50 to 60K more than the budget versions. The waffle suppressor is definitely the best in slot attachment for all of these guns, and it can be extremely expensive, but you can find them in raid, and the JMAC compensator is a cheaper alternative that doesn't affect the recoil too much, and if you want to ball out, the waffle suppressor is definitely the best for recoil. Speaking of recoil, these guns are extremely usable and easy to control, especially after the recoil buffs. Ultimately, the stats in Tarkov don't matter too much. We get stats like vertical and horizontal recoil, and obviously you want those numbers to be low as possible, but they don't really matter because of what the game doesn't tell you. There's all sorts of other stats like recoil dispersion and camera recoil that also really affect how a gun is going to feel. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to that feel. How does a gun feel, and do you find it easy to control? And as you can see here, these guns feel really good. When standing and me not controlling for the recoil at all of these 545 guns, suppressed or unsuppressed, don't have that much crazier of spray patterns than something like a fully decked out HK or a fully decked out Mutant. And when we get to more real world examples of if you're crouched and actually trying to compensate for the recoil, it's almost virtually indistinguishable which gun is which. These guns are very easy to control, and they feel really smooth when you're in a raid. So we have one downside for 545, and that is that the damage is pretty low, and that's true, but we have a ton of upsides. There are more ammos. Those ammos are available in raid. Those ammos are available out of raid. We have more guns, more attachments, and recoil that rivals some of the most expensive guns in the game for less than half the price. Now, this video isn't me saying that you should use this caliber for everything. If I want to snipe, I'm going to grab a DVL or an SR25. If I'm clearing super tight corners, I want an SMG. And if I'm going labs, maybe I want something that packs a little bit of a bigger punch. But the different classifications of guns should feel like they have a place. And all I'm saying is that a lot of the 545 rifles definitely have a place in Tarkov, in and out of PvP. Of course, if you have some BP that you crafted or some M61 lying around, use that over this. Use the best stuff that you have. But if you don't have a whole lot, 545 is a great way to go. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. If you liked the video, think about dropping a like, commenting down below, or subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I stream Escape from Tarkov 6 days a week. All my links will be down below. I'd love to have you stop by and say hey. And if you're looking for people to play Tarkov with, our Discord server is an awesome place to be. That link is down below as well. Thank you again for stopping by, and I will definitely see y'all on the next one.